Are there budget-friendly options in watercolor that actually work for you? I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for joining me today. I'm going to take a look at some budget-friendly options for you in watercolor. Well, accomplices, I've heard from a lot of you that, your budgets are similar to mine. There's not always room for buying those luscious and expensive watercolor supplies, and that covers the, the gamut. Paper, pigment, brushes, all of it can just run so high. And every so often I hear from a company that has a more budget-friendly option. And I'm not sponsored by any company, I just want to tell you that, in any great form. I do receive the odd little gift where I can share the results with you. But the other paint companies that I prefer to use, I'm not affiliated with any of them at all, other than Lebens and Brushes, these beautiful brushes that I just so adore and can't live without in my studio. If you purchase a Lebens and brush and you use my name, you can get a 20% discount on the purchase. So keep that in mind. I'll put the link in the description for you. But I just wanted to mention that because I do often tell you about products that I love, and I just wanted you to know that I'm not affiliated. They're not paying me to say what I say about them. So this company is called Lightwish, and they just messaged and said, could we send you something to try? And I thought, well, I am always open to trying and looking at different options for our watercolor play. And this is, it's a beautiful little sketchbook. It feels kind of Swedish, which is kind of fun. So great for if you're out and about, you want to travel, a little travel journal. You can cut your own paper and put little punches in it and holes in it and take it along with you. So that is kind of a fun thing. I am planning a trip with my sister-in-law next spring, and I'm looking forward to being able to take something like this along with me. So we'll test out that paper. I believe it feels like a cold press. It's not entirely smooth, but it feels like nice paper. It's quite nice and thick, so it's at least 140 pound. And I'll check that out in a moment for you as well. The paints, when they arrived, I'm just going to take this paper away from it for a moment. When they arrived in this beautiful box, I was quite impressed. It's heavy. There's a lot of paint in here, and it's artist grade watercolors, and there's 48 of them in the tin. And I thought the packaging was absolutely lovely. It comes with a beautiful little paper with the names of all the colors on, which I appreciate, because the last time I had something like similar to this, I had to write all my own in, and it took quite a bit of time. So this is lovely. All the names of the colors are there, and you can put your little swatch beside. I won't do that today. I don't want to test all of the colors. I just want to show you perhaps how this might play out in some of the things that we like to do. And again, more beauty in the packaging. This is a lovely little cloth. I don't know that I would use it to sop up paint and slops, but it's a lovely way to package. Just going to set all of this aside. And Lightwish is a company. They have all kinds of paints and pastels and different things. You can find them at lightwish.com, and I think you can also find their products on Amazon online. So check them out if you like what we discover here today. Now I did flip these open just so I could save some time today. It comes with a lovely little brush. I love that this brush has that precision point. As you know, I like to be able to draw my branches and bits of landscape things in my painting with my paintbrush. So it actually Has quite a bit of sizing or something on it. We'll just soften that up a tiny bit. Often when I get a new brush, I will take it to my sink and give it a little shampoo. You can use hand soap, something mild, not full of a lot of chemicals and things. It's just not necessary. You can use just dish soap as well, just something with a bit of suds to it to get that I don't know if it's sizing or a glue. It feels doesn't feel sticky. It feels, now that it's wet, the stuff that's coming off, it feels a bit slippery. So I'm not sure what that was that they put on to hold the brush bristles in place, but it's a good thing that they do that, because in transit it can change things a lot on your brush. But so now I've got it wet and I've got it clean, and I can still see that there's a beautiful precision point. It's got a nice belly on it, and they do have all kinds of brushes too. This is nice. It doesn't say what material the brush is made of. I'm guessing it's a synthetic. Not many use real hair and fur and that kind of thing nowadays, just because it's not ethical, unless you're like Tracy Levinson, who recycles things from old fur coats and different things that are available. But the big belly on it, the thickness of the pigment, or the filaments and hairs, bristles, I guess you would call them, look like they would hold a lot. Now it's feeling sticky, so I'm just going to make sure I give that just a little extra little spin in the clear water, and then we'll get started. So there's 48 colors. They have a white. It's backwards. They have a white in this corner and a black in this corner, and then they range all the way through. And a lot of their colors have similar names to what we're used to: a Payne's Gray and cadmium oranges and those kind of things. So we'll see what they turn out to do. Now, because I want to leave these on here until I guess I don't have to do that, because they have labeled that and it's in order. So I'm going to take some of these off. I should have done that earlier, but I didn't. I just was going to say, because the little pans here, and these are actually, they look almost like a half pan. You can buy lots of paints, many of you probably have, that are already in the palette. And there's pans and there's half pans. The palettes that I love with my big brushes are specially made for the larger brushes, the solo palettes from Michael Solovyev's Watercolor Online. All right, let's get. Today I'm going to use some Bauhong Masters paper as well, but I will test on the little travel journal as well. Okay, yeah, let's test it on that first. This is, turn that way. I don't know if you can see all of that. It's it's kind of like when you write, when you open that first page of your journal or whatever it is, and it's just sometimes hard to get that first mark down. And this is, kind of where this is at right now. But let's take a look. I'm not going to just pop right down in there. I'm not going to wet the whole palette because of the way they're set in. I think my typical way of spritzing everything and getting it nice and wet and juicy wouldn't be as effective here, because I think it would sort of flow into each different one. So I just want to, let's try some of the brighter ones. This is a nice, I think this one's called Chinese Red. Let's see how it re-wets. Oh, that's quite luscious. And look at the flow. Look how much paint I got on this brush just from that quick dab. I did read that these paints are made with gum arabic, which is what a lot of the other, I know my Daniel Smiths are gum arabic. It makes a difference. It makes a difference in how the paint stays together, of course, that's what it's there for, but it also makes a difference in how the paint flows. Okay, so we've got a nice red. Let's try. These other ones are blues, but they're very dark, and so I can't tell you what the names are. I believe this is a cobalt. And I just want to touch it in. This paper's quite nice. It's on a dry brush. It seems to have a nice effect. Now they don't have a quinacridone gold, but I do want to check and see if maybe one of these brighter, deeper yellows might work the same in pushing those other pigments out of the way. And it doesn't really, but that's all right. It's a lovely color. And if I add water to the edge, you can see how it softens nicely. Pull that back so we don't have any harsh edges. I think this is going to work quite well for the style of painting that I like to do anyway. And let me just, I think this is a lovely green. Like I said, it doesn't take much to wet those, which I appreciate. Now the green is pushing the pink or the red a little bit. Very interesting. This brush is really quite lovely. It's able to pick up a lot of pigment. And then the other thing I just want to quickly check while we're here is, let me just try a bigger option here. With one of my bright brushes, I just want to see how it lifts. So the red is a bit staining, at least that particular red is. The paper is allowing me to lift quite nicely. Yeah, I have no concerns yet with how this pigment and this paper is working. Well, lovely. That's great. I'm glad that I got to test that on this paper. Again, not knowing exactly what it is they've sent me in terms of the paper, I'd be really happy taking this along on any journey, any little trip out. I'm not much of a plein air painter, but I can see where this would make that a lot easier to do. And then having all of these paints at your disposal and this brush, well, that's one thing I guess I should have tested ahead of time as well, is the ability of that tip to do what I like to do. Now, I didn't tip the brush into my paper towel to dry it off, so it's holding a ton of water and it's left a lot on that surface, which is very nice. This brush is still holding its tip quite nicely. Yes, I like that it's holding that nice line. And that it's pulled the paint up into the belly of the brush. And like I say, that little bit of paint can go a long way. All right, so it's doing the things that I'm expecting any brush that I'd like to use, and I appreciate that. That is really quite lovely. I'm going to close this. It's probably going to make a mark on there, but then it will look like an artist's book, right? Lots of paint splatters and you know, and any place I go, I always make sure that I apologize if my hands are covered in paint or my clothing, because sometimes it just gets everywhere. All right, so let's take a quick look at doing a a birch tree. Make one tree there. And as you know, I like to make the sides of my trees a little on the rougher side, just because trees aren't perfectly straight. So I just rip the paint into strips and apply them along the sides. I think this might be a solo tree, just because we don't have a lot of time for fiddling with the tape. I had a beautiful workshop this past weekend. There was actually 10 artists all together and myself, and we painted all weekend long. It was absolutely fabulous. We were out in a forested setting, and we walked in nature. We observed the shadows and the shapes, and we did some shrubbery, some birch trees, and just had a real lot of fun with it. And the birch trees, as always, are such a hit with everyone. They are fun to do, and often I think most of the participants in the workshop found as well, there's something about putting down the tape and creating your trees, and many of them just wanted to keep doing that for an extended period of time. So it's a fun way to ease yourself into your painting. Sometimes when you sit down at your table, if you're like me, you're kind of drawing a blank, and so the trees for me are just a fun way to just sort of settle into it. You start creating. You're planning a little bit of a landscape, having a bit of vision with what's going on, and it gives you that lead-in time that sometimes is important. And I'm getting better at stripping these in longer strips. This solo tape, again, this is from Michael Solovyev's Watercolor Online, and I discovered his work about 2 years ago. And actually, I think I mentioned before, I got to take a workshop with him last spring, and we had such a lovely time. And I learned about his lovely products and have been using them ever since. I think they're fabulous, and he's taken the time to research and find companies that produce items after they've worked with artists to find what works and what is best for the process of watercolor. I'm just gonna plump this one out a tiny bit, and sometimes, after seeing I'm so good at pulling those long strips off, as it gets to a smaller place, then it's harder to do. But that's okay. We work through it. I'm going to turn it around and do this side. Something a little wider to grab onto. There we go. And then I can pop that in the middle and bring that right up like that. I think this tree needs to be a bit wider on the bottom. And I will just move that up a tiny bit, I think. If there's little nudges and notches out, that's fine. That can always be where another branch can jut off. All right. I don't often worry about getting a lot of the other smaller branches in, especially when you've got brushes like this, or like your Levinson medium goat hair that I love to use. You can easily draw those on with. I very often use a Payne's Gray or my Mayan Dark Blue. That blue that I tested here, I'll tell you what color that is in a second when I find that piece of paper. Here we go. It's not a Payne's Gray. Where's the cobalt blue? Prussian blue, sea blue, peacock blue. Indigo. It was an indigo. There we go. That makes sense. Any dark blue, any dark green. Sometimes you can mix your own color. If you've got a sepia or a sepia, burnt umber, any of those colors, and just use those for making your branches. If you find that they're too light, you can go over them again with a darker color, and that's fine. All right, so let's get going with our products here. Now I have a bit of blue on. It held so much paint. There's a bit of blue in the water. But I'm going to persevere with this brush. Normally I would use one of my larger brushes, but I'm going to persevere with this one and see how much water we can get on this page. I'm working on a block. As I mentioned, this is the Bao Masters watercolor paper. It's a cold press. It says fine grain, but it does have a nice texture to it. It's not smooth as a hot press paper would be. All right. Now that's a bit of a, that one I just touched is a bit Caribbeanish, a little bit more greeny blue. Let's try this one. That color is probably a bit more sky-like. And so I will work with that. Nice bright sky. As you know, I quite often go the moody route and have those darker skies. And a little bit of that one beside it is coming in, which is fine. I'm not going to worry about that. That's the thing with using smaller pans. That you know, you can slop over and pick up other colors, so you want to be aware of that. But I don't mind that other bluey green has popped through a little bit. And I'm guessing that this one here is the Payne's Gray. Yeah. So I'm just putting a tiny bit of that. It's almost actually it's not a Payne's Gray, it's a brown. And that's okay. Because sometimes under the clouds there's a bit of a brownish color. Now we could go in and, just because we're testing all these beautiful colors, add a little bit of the oranges. These are all cadmiums. There's a cadmium light orange and a cadmium medium and so there's lots of colors to choose from. I don't worry much about where I'm placing these. The water is still moving around on the page enough that we're getting a bit of melding and flowing together. And I think just for the fun of it, I would like to put in let's see if we can find I'm sort of guessing here, when, you know, if you go with this set, you'll see that there's, once you've done your swatches, you'll be more familiar with where things are. But this is a beautiful rose color, and I'm just gonna. Oh, that's a bright one. So if we mix that and allow that to go with the blues, it turns into a gorgeous purple. So we're going to get a bit of a rainbow sunset. That'll be fun. And then I think to just soften that a bit, I'll go back into this blue and add a bit of that. I like that. My damp paper towel. If your paper towel is dampish, and if it's not, I always give it a spray. But if it's a bit on the damp side, it allows you to roll it into kind of a soft ball. And when I dab out clouds, I try to leave as much thickness of the paper towel in front of my fingers. I don't want my fingers going through so that they actually touch the paper. through the paper towel, because that will leave a hard polka dotty line. So, and because this is still damp, you can go in and you can lift and pull. Sometimes I just dab and then give a little flick out. Clouds, clouds are clouds. They're random. They're all over the place. You can make whatever shape you want. As I said, if the water's still moving on the page, you will still get those softer edges, and it will be quite beautiful. Now I see what I've done here is I've hit the page a little hard with the brush, and I just want to soften that out. It sort of gave a little line of color there. So I'm just with a damp brush touching that, and it still came through that way. So I think I'll just add a bit more of that blue, just in kind of a loose and random line that looks maybe a little more natural. And we'll take a bit of that out and leave a bit of that in. And this should diffuse quite nicely in the background into a bit of a sunset. I love that these colors are really playing well together. They're flowing well on the page. I like that. Now in my backgrounds, I very often will do just a bit of a mountainy forested area behind. And I often do that with the dark blues. And so I'm going to go, I think this one here looks like it might be. Let's test that out. That might be a Payne's Gray. It is. All right, so Payne's Gray. Let's see what the next one beside it is. Oh. Okay, we have two Payne's Gray. Payne Grays, I mean. Interesting. All right, let's test that one. Let's have a look here and see what it's. Now that's a bit more bluey gray, so that's what I'm going to go with for my mountains and my trees in the background. I might even add a bit more of one of these darker blues into it. Yeah, that's what we want. That's what we want. This is beautiful dark blue, gray blue. And it can do just some treetop shapes in the background. This is a nice brush for adding some of those points on the tree. I'm going to tell you what color this is. I think it might be an indigo too. Let's see. This is a Prussian blue. It's a bit brighter than what I normally use, but it is very pretty. And I like how it's fading back, similar to what my Mayan dark blue does in the Daniel Smith brand. So this is, it's quite pretty in the background. If you wanted to dull that down again, or a bit, you could certainly take the Payne's Gray and add a tiny bit of that in there, or you could mix the Payne's Gray with your blue on your palette, on your mixing area, and just add a little bit of depth to that. I like to sort of bring things down to a bit of a point. It looks like the land back there is coming to a bit of a peak, and then a bit of maybe a bit of an opening where you can see the horizon. I often finish more on this side, but I think what I'd like to do here is, just for the fun of it, change things up a tiny bit, is I'm going to leave, and I'm just going to maybe draw a branch coming into the foreground so it'll look like it's much closer to you. So the rest of this I'm going to turn into a lake. This is wet on dry. I just want to see how how this brush does for that. I'm just going to turn this slightly. And I've gone a little over with the brush into this dry part here, and I'm not sure that's really what I wanted to do. So I'm going to soften those little bits a tiny bit, bring them up into this sky area. Probably will look like, it would be kind of fun to have, you know how you see clouds just on the horizon sometimes? And I dropped a big splotch of water there. I'm just going to take some paint from the surface that I've already applied. I don't need to go back into my palette. And I'm going to create just a space that's wet here, a little bit, and some of it's still white. And now I'm going in with my damp paper towel. And we'll have a little bit of cloudy parts working there. And because I'm, pardon me, dabbing out the wetness before it has a chance to bloom, it will give me those slightly cloudy shapes. We don't really want them to be really pronounced, but I like that they're kind of there on the horizon. And I'm just going to soften out a tiny bit of the of that blue line that I put across. So these pigments are really quite lovely and rich. There, I like that. And I'm going to leave this edge kind of broken. I like that there's a bit of light coming through, and I think it adds to the appearance of like a sparkle out on the horizon. Now I'm going to go back to this Light Wish brush. I wish there was more details on this because it is quite lovely. And if they have a whole set like this, it would be fun to have that on hand. So this brush holds so much pigment, so you're going to have to be careful when you're switching colors, if you care, to make sure that you wash it quite thoroughly. But the rest of this is going to be, again, pigment that I pick up from the painting itself. I don't even have to go back into my palette. And that's quite often how I work with my other paints as well. So this is a fun and easy way to get that water waves effect. And you can, bring a little bit of color and have it smooth in some places so that the water's looking a little glassy, where it's moving up and down. Just adding a bit of water and moving that about. And again, I'm just quickly dabbing. It sounds like I'm hitting it hard, but I'm not. It's just there's a bit of, the paper is buckled a tiny bit, and so when I'm hitting it lightly, it's kind of making that sound. So any of those wet spots, I can go in and I'm getting that mistiness, that foaminess. Just a bit more wet on my brush. I don't want a lot of color here. I just would love to see all of that coming through. Now we did a bit of the orange. We could always, reflect that into the water, barely touching until I know what's there. Yes. Yeah. So that paint, although it looks like it's dried and I just had a little bit of water on my brush, I just had to barely touch the surface of it, and I'm getting this lovely little bit of color in my water. I don't want a ton of it. Often when water is reflecting, you see more glistening, more almost silver white highlights. And then where was that pinky color? I think it was that. Was it that red that we used? one touch and it was a lot more than I intended. All right, so we'll work some of that out. We'll bring the pink as a reflection coming down. We'll move some of it up into this part of the ocean, the lake, the water feature, whatever we have. And maybe just, I love that color is so rosy and beautiful. I just wanted to double check to see what color it was, and I think it's called rose. I'm going to wipe most of that off of my brush and just ever so lightly see if I can add a tiny hint of that up into this part of the water feature. And I think I'll leave it at that. We don't want so much on this side because the trees are actually, I think, hiding a lot of that, so we don't need to worry too much about that. If I do want to extend that later, I think I can. This seems to re-wet quite nicely. There is a lot of yellow in the sky. Maybe we'll just add just a little tiny more bit of some of that down in here. Yeah. All right. Often in my trees in the background, I will do a bit of green. Was this the green we were using? That's actually a bright green. A lot of these colors they look like single pigment, so they'll be a little brighter, a little more than, and those are browns and grays. Let's see what we can find here. Oh, there was an olive green that I thought maybe would be more to my liking. And these are quite bluey. And yeah, I'll try one of these a little bit brighter just to add another bit of color and shadow into this background. I'll hesitate now. Quite often on my backgrounds, I will add the quinacridone gold and watch it push away. I'm not certain that that's what we want here. So I'm just going to just add just a tiny bit of that Prussian blue, but in a bit of a thicker mix. And that will give us some. I think I'll leave this part of it for now. I want to see how it will work with the application on the trees. So normally we don't take this off until the paper is completely dry, but because it was so freshly put on, I think, and I never burnish my tape down, but because it was freshly put on, I think we're okay with that. Oh my goodness. Let's try this. Oh, thanks, Lorenz. So, you know, if you are on a budget, one thing I can tell you is that I think the first thing I would look at when I wanted to step it up to the next level would be the paper. You can see how this beautiful paper is allowing me to pull off my tape gently. I am still being careful, of course. I'm pulling it as low and as slow as I can to the surface. And I try to keep the pull sort of in line with the tape itself. If I was to try to pull it this way or this way, if it did start to pull the surface of the paper away, it would rip into my design. So I keep it right as low as I can. Sometimes I save these for other things, you know, little bits and pieces of paper so that it can, or tape so it can be used. Now here's where you want to be careful too. Sometimes I suggest you start from both ends and pull towards the middle. But as I said, because this is so freshly being laid down, I think it'll be okay. All right. My little plastic tab. I have a lot of them. I've been saving them because I teach a lot of workshops, and it's always fun to be able to share them with people in the workshops. Some of these are thicker on the end, some are a little bit thinner. I'm going to go with the thinner one, just because these are small areas to dip them into. In a larger palette, of course, these can dip right into the paint. But I think what I'll do here is, in the palette where I've just sort of tested some colors out, and there's a bit of color sitting, I'm going to try those first and see how that works. And this will be great. So, once this color is laid down, and I'm going to use all of the colors that I've tested here. It doesn't matter to me. I just love my birch trees to be a little bit unusual. Sometimes I'll add purple or orange or different colors to it. And so these bits of color and water here that have been sitting, so they're not really wet, so the pigment is perhaps a little thicker, perfect for picking up and laying down on the surface of the paper. I like to try to make the bottoms of my trees a little bit darker, just because quite often they're in more shadow. I'm going to define this just by drawing a line down there with my plastic tab. And so it gives you an idea of which trees are in the foreground. And this is how you can, you know, just sort of fine-tune the rest of your painting. Trees in behind will have a bit more dark in those shadowy areas. We can add that in. When you're applying the pigment to the paper, if you give it just the slightest curve, it helps to give those trees another dimension as well, right? And I try to do, I'm dipping my fingers in there, and that's not great. Often, you know, if you have time to wait until everything is dry, it's preferable. But if you don't, you just have to watch a little more carefully where you're putting your hands. And I noticed, you know, every time I do a workshop, I find I notice more what the general tendency is for most people. And we do tend to have, you know, a certain way of moving our hands, so making our horizon straighter is sometimes a bit of an issue. And we tend, it seems, to see patterns. And so when you're doing this, you kind of want to remember that this is a real random situation. So I don't want to have my lines of color at the same intervals and at the same intensity on each tree trunk. So just things to consider. And when I think I probably could use more, I just stop and I don't do more, because you can always add. It's harder to take away, right? And sometimes just sitting with it for a few minutes makes a difference too. So when I turn it around so I can do the other side of the tree, so that I'm not wiping my hand across what I've already done, I try to remember not to go right across from where I am. So I make them a bit a bit random, and they don't have to be large. I'll put a few more at the bottom here, just so I can define that trunk. And we'll just make a couple on this side. Another thing to consider when you're doing these, of course, is your light source. Here it seems to be sort of all coming from the back, so I'm not going to worry too much about having one side of my tree much brighter than the other. But that's always something to keep in mind too when you're doing this. And I think that's probably all I'm going to end up doing here. And I'm going to step away from that lovely pointed brush and go back to my bright. Now, I know now with this set of paints is that they're ready to go. They're luscious and they're ready and they're thick and they're rich. So when I have my bright, I don't really want to go right in to a color and straight onto my page. I want to test it first. So just really lightly. You can see already it's got pigment on there. I think what I'm going to do, rather than introduce more color at this point in time, is I'm going to go with a damp brush. So I've wet it, I've dabbed it on my little paper towel pad there. I'm just going to gently go in and encourage some of these bits of color here across the page, or across the tree trunk, but not necessarily right across. And I kind of like where that little yellow bit came in there, and I'll have to remember that, and I'll go in that. It's the fourth one down. I'll find the color of it later. So I like that. I think I'm going to just put a bit of, just the slightest bit on the palette, and rather than go back in and dip straight into the pan, I'll dip into that little tiny bit on the palette here, if you can see that. So I've just put a tiny, just the smallest amount there. Not really wet. It's gonna dry up a little bit. So when I touch a damp brush into it, I'm just going to be able to pick up that slightest bit. Okay. And here's where patience, plays in. So with that tiny bit of orange, I'm going to just touch it into some of those blue places. Those little blue dots. On that side, I think that's probably enough. Turn it back around. So I've still got paint in my palette, little bits here and there from where I was dipping the plastic tab in. And I can encourage some of that. I can add it to something that's already on the page in some of these instances. Just barely dampening my brush with what's in the mixing area in the palette. Touching what's already on the page, pulling that out a tiny bit. Sometimes they go a little bit random and off to the side, and then bringing in that orange here and there. Just gives another level of depth if you add a lighter color. When I wet my brush, I very often just, when I'm splashing around in my water vessels, sometimes the water will splatter up on the sides and there'll be little water droplets. Sometimes that's what I use, is just those one dab in that water droplet, and that's all I need on my brush. So some of these colors mixing together are coming out a bit on the brighter side of green, and that's okay. I mean, if afterwards when I take a look at it, when I take my photograph and I step away and have a little look at what I've done, if that looks too glaring or too bright to me, I can always go back in with just the slightest hint of maybe a Payne's gray or something more neutral. If you have a neutral tint, I didn't notice that there was a neutral tint in here, but there's always options for doing that. And just touch it up after. Very light. You don't need a really wet brush even. If you go back to your the original brush, let's just take a look, because if you don't have the option of having a bright, let's see what these guys can do. So I just want to touch in where I left that bit of pigment. I'm wetting it slightly and using the side of the brush and just encouraging some of that to move across the tree. Often to me it looks like, very often those knots are dark and then the rest kind of softens out. It's almost like a bit of a bruised look. But you can certainly work with those bits of color. And you don't, as I say, you don't need a lot on your tree. Work with what's there. This is going to be a line here. I don't want this tree to be too fat, so I'm just going to go in and fill in a bit of that color. And it's up to you. I mean, you can leave your trees white in the background. You can start to fill them all in. I like to leave a little bit of white just for that pop. Makes the other colors look a little more vibrant. Often the tendency for folks new to watercolor is to fill in the whole page. And with watercolor, the premise is we leave enough white on the page to allow for those sparkles to come through. The paper, especially the rough paper, is designed for that. The texture of that paper will allow for those little bits of the white of the paper to shine through. Your watercolors are basically mostly translucent. There are some opaque ones, of course, but the translucency of the pigment, of the paints, allows for just that slightest bit. You may not even notice it sometimes, but that little tiny bit of the white paper to show through. So that's why I like to dab out a tiny bit with my paper towel. I like to use the side of the brush and a little bit of wet on dry so that you're just sort of scuffing the edge of the surface. And the lightest touch. If you don't put much pressure on your brush and you just slide it across, the edge of the side of the brush will just sort of hit some of those bumpy surfaces along the way, and that gives you that beautiful stipply kind of texture. So if you're using this brush, just slow and gentle, soften a little bit of those places where you've actually added the pigment in. Once you've re-wet it, a little bit of it will come out. If you were using a bright and you were scrubbing away at it, you'd take more of it out, of course. But at this point in time, the bright, if I was to use that, I would be using it very lightly. I wouldn't be scrubbing. I just want to wake up that paint with a tiny bit of moisture, and then just say, hey, come with me across this tree a little bit. We're gonna add some dimension. We're gonna add some really beautiful effects to this tree. So there's ways of doing that always. If you need more, you can go back into your pigment right from the palette and add a little bit on the edge of, sometimes just touching the edge of your tree is all you need to bring in a little bit of definition. If I had a dark tree on a dark background, I'd want to make sure that there was, or a light tree up rather on a light background, I'd want to make sure that there was more of a definition on the sides, on the edges. These are all sort of coming from the same place, so I'm going to give them pretty much equal treatment. If they were further back, I'd want to consider, where that was in terms of light play and how much darker and how much lighter they'd want to be. but these ones sort of, they're a little bit in the background. I'm not going to make them quite as defined, I don't think. And these are pretty skinny, so I don't want to, you know, to add a whole lot of color to them, but just a little bit. And I'll go back in with a bit of the orange and gold, and let's see what we can do with that. All right. So I'm just touching that orange that I put in my palette on the side, and I'm just going to give a little bit. And it's nice to add that gold or that secondary color that you're adding into those trees to some of those darker spots where you've applied with the plastic card. And I'm still using just the tiniest bit from that palette. It doesn't take much, and you get that lovely effect. I've pretty much run out of that, so I'm going to do that again. I'm just going to touch the orange and place it into the palette so that I'm not going straight into my tree with a bright color. And a little bit on these ones here, I think, is all I'm going to need. As always, I like to leave a fair bit to the imagination. And it's entirely up to you to decide how much further you want to take your design. Once I turn it around and give it just another quick touch here and there with a bit of the gold, the orange, and then back in with a tiny bit of the blue gray, and sometimes you can just use your finger. And just a few touches here. These ones that sort of end up here with a lot of white on them. Again, I try to always give it a bit of a curve. And then I think this would probably be a place where I would take the photo, step away, go and have a cup of tea, see where I want to come back, if I want to come back at all, and add any more colors and shapes to it. If anything, I might go in with a fine tip and just add a couple of squiggly little dark branches coming off, short ones. I could certainly put a bit more foreground at the base of this tree. So, I mean, I'm thinking the mat's going to cover that, and it'll look like the tree is coming from definitely the foreground. But you know, you could certainly add a bit of rock or shrubbery down at the bottom there. But I'm pretty happy with this. I can see where my horizon could be a little more on this, you know, a little straighter. But that's again something I would, you know, be more certain of once I step away. So, you know, as always, I take a photograph, I step away, I go and have a cup of tea, make my lunch, whatever's going on, and then when I have a few quiet moments, I'll sit down and I'll look at the photograph, and it's amazing how that process, how that little step just gives you another, it's almost like you're coming back at it with another set of eyes. So give that a go. Yeah, I would say check on Amazon, online at lightwish.com, and see what they have to offer. I'm pretty impressed with what they have here. From what I can see online, you're looking at anywhere from $29 to $70-ish for a set of these, and it looks like they come with at least one brush. And if this brush is any indication of what the rest of their products are that they are offering, I would say definitely a budget-friendly option. I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for joining me today. We spent a bit of time exploring a new brand of paints to me and seeing how they play, and they worked out well. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe to the channel or head on over to their members area. They'll have some fun things happening there soon.